Yes?
It was much better in Canada.
Was it much better in Canada? Well, it was somewhat better. They came to Toronto and couldn't find a place to rent in Toronto. Nobody would rent to an interracial couple in Toronto at the time either. My mother had to take on a substitute white husband, a friend of theirs who played jazz in a band who pretended to be my mom's husband so she could get a place to rent. And finally, when they got a place, he moved out and my dad moved in, and they decided to deal with the fact then. So it wasn't easy in Toronto, and it would be a mistake to sort of think that everything was cozy in Canada. It was not. But it was easier for them than it would have been in the States, and they were able to build their lives here. And they became very, very active, proud Canadians. My father was the first director of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and both of them wrote books about Black history in Canada, and they founded the Ontario Black History Society and spent their lives sort of in the area of human rights and Black history. Yes?
Sometimes when authors write and they're a different gender than their main character, they don't really pull it off, but you did, so I congratulate you. Can you talk a little bit about your decision to make the central character female?
Sure. Can I talk about the decision to make the character female? I was very worried about the very thing you mentioned. Sometimes if you decide to write in another gender, in the other gender, you may not succeed. And of course, you may not succeed writing in your own either, but I was very nervous about it. I was worried that it would be bad, or that I'd be maybe mocked or pilloried for having tried. Would I write authentically? And I was really quite nervous about it. I think the nervousness was good because it made me work harder to really try to imagine myself, as a woman, and to imagine what she might be going through. I gave her, the protagonist, my daughter's name, so I named her after my daughter, my eldest daughter, and thought of her as my daughter as I wrote the story, trying to step into her experiences. And I read a lot, of course, research, but I just had to really stretch emotionally, and worried the whole time that it might not work. But I revised countlessly until I found that I was convinced by her voice. Once I found I had her voice as an older woman, I felt I could believe the rest of the story. But I first had to get her as a woman and find a voice that was credible. Thank you. I see a hand in the back there. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry, what was more enjoyable for you, writing fiction or non-fiction?
What's more enjoyable for me, writing fiction or non-fiction? Fiction. I'm not here to say that one's better than the other, one's not better than the other. I'm not here to say that one's easier than the other, one's not easier. I've written both. I've worked as a journalist, and I've written 4 books of non-fiction and 3 novels. But the novels, the fiction is what engages me the most. It's what I find most enjoyable. I feel that by making up stories, by inventing, basically by lying for entertainment, I feel that I get more profoundly at the truths inside me than by having to adhere exactly to historical fact as a non-fiction writer. So for me, it's more enjoyable to write fiction, but that doesn't mean that fiction is more important than non-fiction. Indeed, I couldn't be here today, I couldn't have written this book or the others without standing on the shoulders of all the historians who've written all the works that I had to read to come to this novel, so to write it. So, but I feel best writing fiction. It's what sort of turns me on the most as a writer. I'm sure I'll write more non-fiction. I'm sure I'll have another few books in the non-fiction, but novels I love the most. Yes?
It's not a personal question, but could you talk a little bit about the Black community in Annapolis? So a third of them left for Sierra Leone, so leaving another 2/3 there. Are they still there, or?
Sure. The question is, could I speak a little bit about the Black community in Nova Scotia? You mentioned Annapolis, and the question was also if a third of them left after 10 years, what about the other 2/3? And the thing that's interesting about Nova Scotia is that it's the site of the oldest Black communities in Canada. Black people have been in Canada from the very first years of the 1600s. The first known Black to be in Canada was a man named Matthew de Costa, who was serving as a translator between the French explorers and the First Nations people in what was then called Nouvelle France, but what is now known as Nova Scotia. That was around 1605 or so. The first known slave in Canada, the first documented slave in Canada was Olivier Le Jeune in 1628 in Quebec City. So blacks have been in Canada from the very early 1600s, but the first major wave of black immigration into Canada in the same short window of time comes right after the American Revolution, when these 3,000 blacks sail from Manhattan to Nova Scotia. 3,000 arriving all in the same 6-month window in a small geographic area, the coast of, Nova Scotia, not just the coast of Nova Scotia. So that's the first major migration of blacks in a large number in a concentrated time frame in Canada, 1783, 3,000 people. And those communities are still there. I mean, the other interesting thing about Nova Scotia is that it's one of the few parts of this country that has discrete, geographically distinct black communities. Most other parts of Canada didn't have distinct black communities, blacks here, whites there. It's much more subtle and people were more interwoven geographically. But in Nova Scotia, as in a few other sections of Canada, in a few places in time, including around London, by the way, in the 1800s. We have some distinct black communities here as well, but they're fairly short-lived, whereas in Nova Scotia we have black communities that are geographically distinct that date back to the 1700s. And yes, of course, the descendants of the black loyalists are still in Nova Scotia. There's a black loyalist heritage society based in Bridgetown, Nova Scotia, just adjacent to Shelburne. So Canada's oldest black communities are to be found in Nova Scotia, and their descendants are still there today, and still very visible and active in Nova Scotian life. Sadly, a few years ago, I used the Black Loyalist Heritage Society archives and library a great deal while I was researching the novel. They were fabulous to me. They made me feel like an honorary Nova Scotian, and really welcomed me and showed me all their documents, showed me sort of facsimiles of the Book of Negroes and so forth, documents of the Book of Negroes. And then about 2 years ago or 4 years ago, they were burned down by an arsonist. Their building was completely obliterated by an arsonist, and all those records were wiped out in a blazing fire that ruined everything. And they're rebuilding now and trying to, but it's hard to recover or to recreate or find again the special documents that have been incinerated in a fire. So they're working hard to rebuild their collection. So it's a very interesting community, and it's very old. It goes back to the 1600s.